This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Hey there, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 80 of DBR Bites. This is the Duke Basketball Roundup. It is our normal mini-series of episodes where we preview different games, we talk about different topics, and myself, Donald Wine, and my partner here, Jason Evans, decided to talk a lot more than Bites normally do. This is probably going to be one of those episodes, but we're still calling it a Bites. Jason Evans, how are you doing this afternoon?
You know, I was going to say to you before we signed on, I was like, should we call this a full episode? It feels like a full episode. This is more than a Bites. Oh, well.
Bites, it's a full bite. We'll say that. We have some topics, obviously, we want to cover a little bit more in depth, but there are a couple of little mini topics that we will do in this episode as well.
I don't know why we have never gotten an email from the listeners to say, what the hell's the definition of a Bites? How is it different from a regular episode? Because I'm not sure I can answer that question right now.
And you know what? You just encourage people to email us that exact question to dbrpodcast@gmail.com. So thank you for that, Jason. We will have all of those in addition to the headlines for the Pitt preview. Let's start with Pitt because we have the basketball game tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. And Jason, as we talked about after the recap from the SMU game, this is a big game as well. Pitt Panthers come in 21st in KenPom, 15th in the net. This is a quad one game once again. So we are looking at a team that is very, very good. Let's talk quickly about their record. They are 12-2, just like Duke. Also undefeated in the ACC, 3-0 in the ACC. They have a few top 100 KenPom wins. They have one against West Virginia by 24. They have one against LSU by 11. They've beaten Ohio State by 1 in overtime, and Stanford, an in-conference opponent now, they beat by 15 in their most recent game. Their other ACC wins against Virginia Tech by 5 and Cal by 12. They only have 2 losses so far this season, and against, again, very decent opponents. Wisconsin, they lost by 6 in what was a very close game, and the one that was kind of the outlier of this was the Mississippi State game in the ACC SEC Challenge where they lost by 33 on the road. That was a game that both Jason and I kind of pegged as one to watch because Pitt at that time was surging, and they kind of came back to earth for a little bit, but have rebounded quite well from that. And Jason, I know you'll talk about some of the players later and who they may be missing or who might be back, but let's first start with the offense because I think their offense is pretty decent, and when you compare it to Duke's defense, that could be a really cool matchup to watch.
Yeah, they're definitely better on offense than they are on defense. Ken Pomeroy says this Pitt team has the 17th best offense and just the 43rd ranked defense. And I should note, you know, before I dive into all the numbers, that I'm pretty sure Pitt is the second best team in the ACC. They're currently number 21 in KenPom. I haven't looked at the new poll. I don't believe that they are ranked yet. There haven't been enough teams to, ahead of them to lose. But I would not be surprised if sometime in the next couple weeks Pitt sneaks their way into the AP ranking or one of those other rankings. But the bottom line is the advanced metric folks, the net, Bart Torvik, Ken Pomeroy, Evan Maya, all those folks say that this is a very good Pittsburgh team, and it is the second best team in the ACC. So let's talk a little bit about their offense that I mentioned again is a top 20 offense in the land. Their success is built around doing everything well. This is not a club that stands out in a big way in like one arena and then is poor at something else. They're good, not great, but they're good at just about everything. They hit 59% of their 2-point field goals. That's the 19th best in the country. That's probably the thing they do better than anything else, is hitting 2-pointers. But they also hit a fairly respectable 35.9% from 3. And if you want to compare that to another team, Duke hits 35.9% of their threes. So, yeah. So the two teams are the same in terms of hitting 3-pointers.
somehow we are ranked behind them in Ken Palm and three pointers, despite the
Oh, there
fact
are
that we
extra
have the
digits
same.
there.
There probably is like thousandths of a percent that we are separated by.
Yeah, exactly. As I continue on their offense, they turn the ball over less than 15% of the time, which is top 30 in the country. They don't get their shots blocked very often. They're an excellent, excellent free throw shooting team. Pitt team hits almost 78% from the line. They play kind of slow. They're not a team that's going to pick up the pace a lot, and they're just an average rebounding team on both offense and defense. Now, Duke has been pretty good on the boards in big games. I'm not saying our rebounding numbers are like overwhelming on the whole season, but when we play a big game against a team that's supposed to be a good rebounding team, like SMU and Arizona, two of the best rebounding teams in the country, both those games we won the rebounding battle. I think that against this Pitt team, I think first of all, Duke's going to be focused. They know that this is a very, very good opponent. Against this Pitt team, I could see that arena, rebounding being a place where Duke has a real advantage because, again, Pitt is just average on offense and defensive rebounding. Let's get to them on defense. What they do best is they protect the three-point line. Their opponents are only hitting 30% from three, and Pitt doesn't give up a lot of three-point field goals. They're a fairly good shot blocking team. They've got several guys who can block shots and protect the rim, and this is a big Pitt club. Ken Pomeroy has them as the number 26 team in the land in terms of height. And they have four guys who stand 6'10 or taller who are in their rotation. Now, quite often, two of those guys are playing together. And I'm not even including, they got a kid 6'7", Zach Austin, who has major leaping ability and averages close to 2 blocks per game over his career. He doesn't even count among the trees on this team. This Pittsburgh team, it is a legitimate big team, probably the biggest team, overall position wise that Duke's going to face all year.
As an aside, Jason, I don't know if you looked at this, but did you notice that we have dropped from the tallest team in the country to the second tallest team in the country? Because Elon apparently has more guys that are, a little bit taller that are playing a little bit more minutes than our tall guys that have squeaked them past us somehow. I didn't realize that height could change during the year, but of course it's based on who plays and who
Well, it's
doesn't.
based on minutes. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's not like the average height of your team. It is how many minutes each guy plays in terms of, how often is that 6'10" guy, 7-foot guy on the floor?
So my point is this: Stanley Borden, get ready. I need you to play 30 minutes in this game. We need to get back up to the number one spot in height. That's how we do it.
All right, as I wrap up their defense, it is worth noting there's one thing that Pitt really doesn't do well on defense, and that is get steals and get turnovers. And we've seen Duke this year. Duke is great at not turning the ball over. You're going to see Duke getting shots in this game. The question is, are we going to be able to hit those shots? Because this Pitt team is usually pretty good at limiting teams, especially from the perimeter.
Jason, as we move on to the players, I think the best part about this and kind of previewing this is that Pitt, unlike most teams in college basketball, have a lot of guys that we remember from last year.
Yeah.
Which is terrific because that helps us with this kind of preview. So go ahead and take it away. Tell us about some of the players that we can see. And again, I know there's a couple that have been hurt early in the season. I'm sure you probably know the answer to the question, will some of these guys that have been hurt earlier in the season, will they be back for this game?
Yeah, and I think the big question in this game is the status of Damian Dunn. He is a transfer from Houston and Temple who was averaging better than 15 points per game through their first game, through Pitt's first 5 games, and playing really, really well. He was hitting, here's a big number for you, 52% of his three-pointers. And frankly, he was part of one of the best backcourts in the country alongside Ishmael Leggett and Jalen Lowe at Pitt. And then he had this crazy game against LSU where he picked up 5 fouls in 12 minutes. And this is not a dude who ordinarily fouls a lot. It was just weird. It completely took him out of the game. No problem. He's going to bounce back and have a good game his next game against Wisconsin. Damian Dunn, 2 minutes into that game, fell down, sprained his ankle, badly hurt his thumb. He had to have surgery on the thumb, and he has been out ever since. And frankly, I think Pitt has not been nearly as good a team without him in the backcourt helping them out. But just the other day, they played on Saturday, and he was warming up with his teammates. He was in uniform warming up. He did not appear in that game. But Jeff Capel said afterwards that there is a chance he will play against Duke. He's been doing defensive drills apparently, and not yet playing full speed on offense, but he's been working his way back into the team. It would be huge for them if they get him back. And it looks like there's a very, very real possibility that he will return for the Duke game. If not as a starter, then perhaps as a spot minute kind of guy.
And it kind of wonders what Pitt does with him back on the floor, even if in very, very reserved limited minutes, right? Because we've seen guys who are integral to a team be hurt for extended periods, and then the team kind of gets used to playing without that player. And then they kind of have to reintegrate back into a lineup a guy who, again, is going to come on the floor. When he comes on the floor, it does not matter if it's 2 minutes or 30 minutes. He's going to end up with the ball in his hands. He's going to be a focal point of what they're trying to do. So it's going to be interesting to see if Jeff Capel decides, yes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever is enough for me to put him in the game and we can figure this out on the fly because he's that important. Or do I hold him out one more game? I know it's against Duke, but do I hold him out one more to get him fully back to fitness for the rest of the ACC season?
Yeah, and it is worth noting about Damian Dunn. Pitt was number 14 in Ken Pom when he went down. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was a team that really, when I say I thought they looked really good with him, I was not making things up. They look,
and they're 21 good now, so it's not like the drop off has been huge. So,
well, it's interesting. What happened to them was they were 14. They lost him. They struggled a little bit. You mentioned that Mississippi State game. They had some other poor results. They fell like into the mid to high 30s, I think, or mid 30s at least, and then they worked their way back up to where they are now, number 21. Let's get to some of the people that we know are going to play, at least unless something truly surprising happens. And it really starts with Jalen Lowe. Donald, I don't know if you remember this. I'm sure on the podcast I talked about Jalen Lowe last season, even though he was just a reserve guard for Pitt, because I saw several other games. I really wanted to watch Jeff Capel's team. And I was, every time that guy was on the floor, I was like so impressed with him at his ability to get to the spots he wanted to make difficult shots. He just seemed, this was a guy who was a freshman who wasn't highly touted. And I was like, where'd this guy come from? He wasn't a starter for the most part until mid-season or so. And he shared backcourt minutes with Bub Carrington. Now, Bub went on to the NBA. He's now playing
He's good
with the pros. Yeah, he's quite good. Yeah. He was I forget if he was a lottery pick or not, or just after the lottery, but yeah. Bub Carrington was really good last year. Now that Bub Carrington is gone, Jalen Lowe has taken over. He is an incredibly creative dribbler. He finds a way to pierce the interior of opposing defenses, and he gets to the free throw line. Get ready for a big number. Jalen Lowe's been to the line 72 times this year. Cooper Flagg has been to the line 75 times. We talk about how much Cooper Flagg gets fouled and how much he gets to the line. Now we're facing a guy who does it just as much as he does. And by the way, when Jalen Lowe gets to the line, he knocks it down. He's hitting almost 89% from the charity stripe. The ball is in his hands almost the whole time on offense. He averages better than 6 assists per game. Absolutely, this kid is absolutely a contender for all ACC. I'd say, he's probably right on the cusp between first and second team right now. It's, I haven't really looked at the whole conference to figure things out, and I could be wrong. He could be a lock to be first team, frankly, at the moment. He has been really, really good for them this season, but he does have a weakness. You don't need to worry about him too much from three-point range. He's only hitting 28% from deep this year. Now, he hit 35% a year ago, so maybe he's got a little, regression to the mean coming up, with him getting hot a little bit. But despite that poor percentage, only 28%, he is shooting about 5 threes per game. He's the most likely guy on their team to shoot from there, but he's not someone who you would expect to pull up and drain him in your face multiple times over the course of the game. I want to talk about Ishmael Leggett next. He is a fifth-year senior. He has really stepped up this season. Last year, Ishmael Leggett was like a 12-point per game guy. He was like complimentary kind of player for Pitt and a good defensive specialist. This year, he's 18 points per game almost. I mean, that's a big jump. For dude to go from 12 to 18 points per game is huge. It shows you how much Ishmael Leggett has expanded his game as a super senior this year. He gets rebounds, assists, steals, even his blocks. All these things are at career highs for him. His three-point shooting is down a little bit, only at about 30%. but he's been really great at slicing to the goal and getting a mid-range game going. I talked earlier about the fact that Pitt is really good at 2-point field goals. Ishmael Leggett hits better than 63% of his 2-point field goals. That's sort of outrageous for a 6'3" wing, Donald. For a guy like that to be hitting 63% is it's kind of crazy. The other guy they have on the perimeter right now is 6'7" wing Zach Austin. He is a pogo stick shot blocker, top tier defender. But something crazy happened with him this year. He can suddenly shoot. I don't know where this came from. I remember watching Zach Austin last year. This was not a guy that you'd go like, oh, careful, he's going to raise up on you. His first 3 seasons in college basketball, he hit like 31, 32% from 3. This year, he's hitting 45%. I don't know where this happened, but I think it's not just a fluke, because if you look at his free throw shooting, he's hitting 88% from the free throw line. So here I am, I'm talking about these guys. Everybody I'm talking about is dangerous in some kind of way. Let's get to their big men now, because their big men are really, really interesting. It starts with the Diaz-Graham twins. 7-foot Guillermo, who's better than his 6'11" brother, George or Jorge. I'm not sure of that.
Jorge, yeah.
I think it's Jorge? Okay. Jorge, sometimes doesn't even play against top-tier opponents. Like, he didn't play against Ohio State or LSU. I don't think we're going to see very much of him. But Guillermo is a key piece for them. He stands 7 feet tall. He is very comfortable on the perimeter, which makes him somewhat unique for a 7-footer. He's taken more threes on this season than Cooper Flagg has. We think of Cooper Flagg as a guy who, is comfortable inside and out. Guillermo Diaz-Graham takes a lot of three-pointers, but he's only hit 25% of them. Now, he was better than 40% a year ago, so he definitely can make them. He is thin and long. He's a good shot blocker, a little bit foul prone, and I expect Guillermo Diaz-Graham to get the assignment on Cooper Flagg. I don't think Cooper's played against anyone as big and as long as Guillermo Diaz-Graham on this season. It's going to be very interesting to see what Cooper does. I mean, I'm betting he'll start on the perimeter and try and break him down and get into the lane. But I'm telling you, Diaz-Graham can block some shots, and it could be a very interesting test for Cooper. Their other big man is Cameron Corrin. You mentioned, Donald, that we recognize a lot of these. Everybody I've named so far was on Pitt last year, other than Cameron Corrin.
And
but
Dunn.
we should remember.
Yeah.
We should remember him as well. And yes, Dunn, you're right. Came over from Houston. I apologize. But we should remember Cameron Corhan because he played Florida State last year. He leads Pitt in dunks. Dude is really athletic and gets up, even though he's a solid 235 pounds. He has a very nice mid-range game. For a big man, he is not afraid. You give him an 8 to 12-foot jumper in the lane, he will take it and he will bury it on you. They played Cal a few days ago, and Cameron Corhan had 19 and 11 against Cal. You need to pay attention to a big man who gets 19 and 11. On the season, dude is hitting better than 68% from the field. And he's going to be a really interesting matchup with Man-Man because I think he'll have a strength advantage on Man-Man. He is a tough physical guy. One other guy I wanted to mention before we're all done, and that's a freshman wing they have named Brandon Cummings. Now, he came to Pitt as a very unheralded recruit. He was barely in the top 150. A lot of folks had him out of the top 150. But Jeff Capel has become incredible at finding these guys who are not highly touted recruits on the perimeter and turning them into really good players. Jalen Lowe was like that. Bub Carrington was like that. And this year, we're getting that from Brandon Cummings. He has been in the rotation for them from day one, and he shot really well. He's hitting like 44% from three-point range and 61% on his two-pointers. But here's the weird thing about Brandon Cummings. His playing time is wildly inconsistent. So they played Stanford and Cal in back-to-back games this past week. He played 38 minutes against Cal. Like, basically, the whole game, 38 minutes against Cal. Scored 15 points. He grabbed significant rebounds and assists. 3 days later, they played Stanford. He played only 14 minutes. It was basically invisible. Just 4 points scored. And it's been like that for him all year long. I can't figure it out. Like, they played Virginia Tech. He plays 10 minutes, scores 2 points. Literally, a few days later, they play Eastern Kentucky. He goes off for 30 points, 6 of 8 three-pointers. Like, what Brandon Cummings is going to show up, I don't know. But if he's playing well off the bench for them, that is a problem for Duke. And speaking of the bench, Jeff Capel, who learned at the feet of the master, Coach K, Jeff Capel does not like to use his bench.
Yep.
My man knows who his 5 or 6 best players are, and he's perfectly content riding them. This is a team that is 302nd in the country in terms of bench minutes. That's not in a positive way. That's a negative way. The bench barely plays for Pitt. Against Virginia Tech, Jalen Lowe played 40 minutes. Ishmael Leggett played 39. Every single starter played more than 30 minutes. And that game was not an outlier. That's what they do all the time. Jalen Lowe's averaging like 35 minutes a game. Ishmael Leggett's averaging like 34 minutes a game. Now, the one interesting thing is when Damian Dunn comes back, that could change. That could give them a little more depth because they've been, playing other guys while Damian Dunn has been out. But it's a very interesting team, this Pitt club, in that they don't play very deep. Jeff Capel, I won't be Ishmael Leggett and Jalen Lowe are probably not going to come out of this game against Duke. They'll be in there the whole time.
It's interesting. You mentioned Jorge Diaz-Graham and how he likes to shoot threes. He is tied for second in the number of threes taken for Pitt.
You mean Guillermo? Jorge doesn't play, but you mean Guillermo?
I'm sorry, Guillermo. Yes, Guillermo,
Yeah.
the one that plays a lot. He is on the floor, and when he's on the floor, he's going to shoot threes. So you mentioned Cooper Flagg being a matchup. I see that as a possibility, or even maybe at times a Con Knipple if they want to switch Cooper Flagg off him, just because he's going to be out in the perimeter a little bit more often than not. But Jason, one thing that he does do, he gets into foul trouble often. He's one of those guys that gets 4 or 5 fouls in a single game. So that is where Pitt has kind of struggled when he gets those fouls early and has to go to the bench. It kind of affects their shape ever that much for them to have to do stuff. So as we move into some of the matchups, I start with this. You mentioned guys who aren't here, right? Like the guys who have stepped up in the absence of Blake Henson, who's gone, and Bub Carrington, who's gone. Do you remember last year when we played Pitt? Guess what it was? It was the Blake Henson game, right? Where he went off for 8 threes.
Oh man, he was outrageous. Yeah.
Beat us in Cameron and let the Cameron crazies know about it. Do not let any Pitt players be the hero. That is what the goal is for this. We don't need another Henson game. We want everyone to kind of play within themselves and limit the guys who can do damage from doing said damage. We did just that against SMU. All the guys that you mentioned are guys that we need to worry about and had everybody worried that SMU was this great team. Did not do anything against Duke because we were able to shut them down. All those guys you just mentioned for Pitt, let's hope the same thing happens tomorrow night. I think we don't need any of those guys to think that they can walk onto Cameron Indoor Stadium's floor and Coach K court and think they can be the hero.
Really quick, Donald, related to that, it's worth remembering that a year ago against Duke, Jalen Lowe had a really, really good game at the game in Cameron. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember exactly what I need to look it up exactly what Jalen. What did he do? Oh, I'm trying to find it. He had 17 points, 6 assists, 0 turnovers from a freshman. And I don't think he may not have even been starting at that point. But he's a guy who knows Cameron and doesn't mind playing there.
All of them do. I mean, we talked about 5 or 6 guys who played against Duke last year. And that's not counting Damian Dunn, who played against Duke but didn't play in Cameron. He played against Duke for Houston in the NCAA tournament. So these guys are very familiar with Duke and the mystique and air that is Cameron Indoor Stadium and how to break through that and walk out with a win. So let's not give them any chances to play hero. By doing that, you have to limit the number of second chances they have. What we have started to see, I mentioned this on the recap of SMU, that's not quite a trend yet, and we want to nip it before it does get to that point, is the fact that we've seen teams increase their number of offensive rebounds, the raw data, not the percentages. I'm not worried necessarily about that, but getting the 15 to 20 offensive rebounds is something that we do not want. We want to try and limit them, keep them under 10 offensive rebounds, because if we're getting one shot out of them, one miss, and we're getting the rebound going the other way, that stat that you love, Jason, the number of field goal attempts, that's going to be way down for a Pitt team who's probably going to need every single one of them to keep pace with the scoring talent that is Duke University. Now, one thing that I think you mentioned very briefly is that Pitt does not allow a lot of teams to pass the ball around. They only allow an assist rate of 45.3%. And so that goes counter to what we like to do, which is move the ball around almost too much. We're getting 60, 65%, sometimes 70% offensive assist rate. So we need to just continue to do that. Moving the ball around is going to get way open shots. And I think again, one thing that this will do for Pitt is not necessarily make them play defense and mess up their defense, but it's going to cause them to want to foul to stop us from getting positions where we can be open and get good shots. And if we're going to foul them, or I'm sorry, if they're going to foul us, they're going to get in foul trouble. And some of these key guys are going to have to go to the bench, and Jeff Capel's going to have to test that depth that he does not like to do. So I'm looking forward to that. And then finally, I love Jeff Capel. He is one of the Brotherhood. He is a friend of the pod. He's been on this pod years and years ago. And we really love him, and we think that he is one of the best coaches out there. And one thing that his teams love to do is play big and physical. So what we need to do is play big and physical when needed. There's going to be times where some of these guys are going to try and use whatever size advantage they may have, whether it's width or height, to get into the lane and get into positions where they can do their thing. And these guys need to respond in kind. And this is a game where, and I'm saying not get chippy. It's not usually a chippy game. It's just a big, physical, old style ACC type of game. The type of game that Jeff Capel loves to play. And if we can get into those weeds and play physical and big when we need it, that neutralizes one X factor that Pitt presents over almost every team that they face. They are able to do that, turn it on and off when they need to, and other teams really aren't. Duke needs to show that they can play physical when necessary, and then also get them out of that element and get them to the spots where they need to, again, keep the floor spread wide and be able to take shots that are open. So I'm looking forward to those overall general themes, but in essence, this is going to be a really good game because I think, again, this Pitt team walks in knowing that they can do something that very few teams get to do, win in Cameron. And with that in their minds, they won't be afraid of the lights. And so Duke needs to come out with intensity. They need to come out with physicality, if necessary, and that intensity and urgency, because Pitt is going to do the same. And the one thing that we do not want is for another, step off between Pitt and the Cameron Crazies, because Pitt is celebrating on our home floor. We don't want anybody celebrating on home floor this year. That includes Pitt. It starts with some of these things and to neutralize some of the best assets that they have on their team.
So Ken Pomeroy projects that Duke will win this game 78-66, a 12-point victory for Duke. I'll go ahead and say right now, I think this is going to be a close game. This is like the third or fourth toughest game left on Duke's schedule. Frankly, if this wasn't in Cameron, I think Duke would be like maybe a 5 or 6 point favorite at the most. This Pitt team's really good, and if Damian Dunn is actually going to come back and play in this game and be impactful, which I think he can be, then this is, this could be the toughest ACC assignment that Duke has, aside from maybe playing at Clemson. It's a big game. It's going to be a difficult game, and I will be very interested in seeing if Duke can hold down the Pitt offense, because Pitt they're usually in the 80s. Like almost all their games, they're 80s, 90s. Like they have way more games in the 90s than they do in the 70s and 60s. So it's going to be a real challenge for Duke to see if we can, hold them down and keep them from getting to their usual comfort level, which is, like I say, upper 70s, 80s at least.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. Again, Duke versus Pitt in the friendly confines of Cameron Indoor Stadium. Before we go to a break, Jason, we want to very quickly talk about something that was on Instagram, Twitter the other day. Obviously, Duke men's basketball is the best at putting out social media, and they like to show some of the stats about what happens when the Duke effect rolls into your TV screens or into your town. And the one thing about Duke is no matter when they are on, people are watching. Jason, I know you got some of the numbers on what happened in 2024. But tell them some, because some of them, when we talk about like conference realignment and expansion and the ACC and how football is king, well, let me tell you, there is one team that is king, and it is Duke, but they are not playing football. They are playing basketball.
Yeah, so the Duke Instagram post was as simple as this. It said that in the year of 2024, the calendar year of 2024, Duke hoops, Duke basketball had 60 million views on national television. 60 million people watched Duke basketball on national TV in 2024. And then the Duke Instagram post pointed this out. That was more than 129 out of 134 of the football bowl subdivision teams, meaning the biggest football teams Of the 134 teams in the major conferences, Duke's basketball was watched more than 129 of them. So Donald, that leaves 5 football teams that were watched more this past year than Duke basketball was. I'm going to go ahead and guess. Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, and Notre Dame. That's my guess.
That's probably as good a guess as any. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because Michigan had a down year.
Well, no, but remember, Michigan had the national championship at the beginning of the year, and then they struggled.
Right, they did, but then in any event, if you're saying that Duke basketball is up there alongside Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, and Notre Dame football, Duke basketball is a pretty darn valuable, pretty darn important part of the college sports landscape. And I know everyone likes to say football is the only thing that matters and blah, 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 and all that other kind of stuff. 60 million views, Duke basketball matters.
And when you think about it, I know we did this maybe 2 years ago, where we kind of talked about the number of views per game that certain schools were averaging. And those top 5, 6, 7 schools that you were mentioning were like averaging 2.5 million viewers per game, like on average, like throughout their season, right? And they have upwards of 14, maybe 15 if they get to the national championship, which is going to be seen by more people. Duke averages about 2 to 2.5 million views per game, and they have 35 to 40 of them every year if they get to a national championship. So they're like, when we were talking about the numbers and how Duke can be poised to just, if football ticks up ever so slightly, that Duke is one of the better commodities left in the ACC. This is why, is because the program that is the Brotherhood has built a monster with the brand, and has built a monster where, like them or not, everyone loves to talk about Duke, and like them or not, everyone wants to watch.
I got nothing to add to that. That is accurate. Although I think your number's probably a little bit off. I think Duke basketball probably averages more like 1.6 to 1.8 million views or so.
I included people like you and I who watch many times. So
there you go. Repeat viewing, baby.
Repeat viewing is better, right? You have a nice solid bed. A couple other quick stats that they had. They said that they've played in 4 of the top 5 most viewed regular season games on ESPN in 2024. That includes 2 of the top 3. They played in the most viewed game of the year. I believe that was the first Duke UNC game, 15.1 million viewers. And they played in 3 of the, I'm sorry, that was during the NCAA tournament, the 15.1. I think that was the Duke Houston game. That was 15.1.
Yes, yeah. I was going to say 15 million for the UNC game. I don't think so.
Yeah, no, but the 2 of the top 3 on ESPN were the 2 UNC games. That was 2 of the top 3. And then finally, they played in 3 of the 12 ACC NCAA tournaments with 7+ million views. So again, they played 4 games in the NCAA tournament, and 3 of them were over 7 million people watching. So a lot of eyeballs on Duke. We obviously have at least 1, 2, 3, 4 of ours. I don't think Jason wears glasses, at least on this show he doesn't. So 4 eyeballs will be watching Duke repeatedly, like a lot of you. So the Duke effect is still strong. Continue to watch them in 2025. Let's leave it here. We'll take a quick break. On the other side, we're going to get into football. We finally will discuss what happened at the Gator Bowl after this.
All right, it's a new year. Are you ready to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor has chef-made gourmet meals that make eating, well, easy. They're dietitian approved and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, so you can fuel right and feel great no matter what life throws at you.
Jason, everyone has busy lives, and some are more on the go than others. And Factor takes the guesswork out of meals. With 40 options on the menu each week, it's easy to pick meals tailored to your goals. You can choose from preferences like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. And Jason, here's the best part. The meals are delicious. I love the Factor meals. It's delicious food, it's nutritious, easy prep, and it caters to your schedule. It's a no-brainer.
Okay, everybody, eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/DukeBB50off. Use that code DukeBB50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code DukeBB50off at factormeals.com and get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box.
College hoops is in full force, but you know what time it is in the NFL? Playoffs? Talk about playoffs? Playoffs? You bet we are. Get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL.
Yeah. Hey, Donald, the new DraftKings customers bet $5 and they get $200 in bonus bets instantly. $200 bonus bet. That's pretty good, man. Are you ready to place your first wager? Try something simple like, I don't know, a player to score a touchdown, or pick the team you think is going to go all the way. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your picks as the NFL hits the postseason.
Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code DukeBB. That's code DukeBB for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas. 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
All right, we are back and we shift gears to the gridiron for the final time of this 2024-2025 season because we are now in the new year. Duke, of course, took on Ole Miss in the Gator Bowl down in Jacksonville. That was last Thursday night. There was obviously some time changing, switching around because of the Sugar Bowl being postponed a full day. But eventually Duke played at night, primetime audience. The final score, 52-20 Ole Miss. Duke finishes 9-4. They snap a 5-game bowl win streak. But Jason, I don't look at that score and go, man, Duke got absolutely worked on national TV and they looked terrible doing it, because I thought there was a lot of praise to be had for some of these guys. And I want to start with the main guy that we were all focused on, Henry Beelan IV, who was the starting quarterback for this game. It was the second start ever. He had one start last season after Riley Leonard was hurt. He had played in certain games this year, mainly as a runner. He had thrown just one pass in the 2024 season. He threw a lot more in this game, 25 for 44, 236 yards, 2 touchdowns, just one interception. It was a late pick six. And I think one of the bigger numbers, 0 sacks, considering the fact that we had a guy who had not been with the offensive line. We had a guy who had not been under center and was not comfortable with that line. For them to keep his shirt clean in the sense that he wasn't sacked back there was pretty good. He also added some yards on the ground, not many, but he added some yards on the ground. But I thought it was a very, decent showing by Henry Beelan. I was proud of the fact that he was able to step up under certain circumstances that he had and be able to perform the way he did. And again, until maybe the last 6-7 minutes of the game, keep the ball out of the hands of the other team.
Yeah, I thought it was great that he didn't get sacked at all, and I do want to tip my hat to him, because it wasn't easy against that really, really impressive defensive line for Ole Miss to not get sacked. He had good decision making. He had quick feet. He knew when to get on the move. Duke, I think, was calling lots of quick passes for him to keep pressure off of him. Now he struggled on the deep ball. There were a number of times Duke went deep and he overthrew almost all of them. Almost everything that was like more than 15 yards downfield. His touch wasn't what you would like to see on those plays. But I thought Henry Beelan was very nice. And you say Duke kind of got mollywopped in this game.
No, I like I said, I think the final score at the end, like Ole Miss was pressing the whole game. They got some guys in and they were scoring all the way down to the very end. I did not, when I looked at this, and I'll say this, I have a friend who works on the Ole Miss team, and she said that score was not indicative of how Duke played. I thought they played very well. So coming from the opponent, I think that's a good sign that this team, at least again, while there were a lot of mistakes, which led to a lot of those points, there was a lot of individual performances that I thought really showed that Duke, at least for a while, can hang with some of the better teams in the country. And this team, Ole Miss, as we've mentioned, was a team that was this close to being in the college football playoff. Yeah,
and look, I mean, there was. You mentioned there was some ridiculous stat padding going on, especially connected to Jackson Dart. Lane Kiffin, who's always been a good and honorable man. Oh, wait, sorry. No, he has not ever. Anyway, Lane Kiffin was still calling deep bombs with like up by 30 points. I'm not going to use the language that I actually feel about Lane Kiffin, but yeah, the Mississippi State, I mentioned on the preview that they could either decide that they would be mad at being snubbed and frustrated about playing in a meaningless game, or they could be mad at being snubbed and decide to take it out on Duke. And frankly, they took it out on Duke. And I also mentioned on the preview that we could not let them get big yardage on the ground, that we had to be able to focus on stopping Jackson Dart's aerial attack. They ended up getting 151 yards rushing. And I mean, if you allow Ole Miss to get yards on the ground, you're going to be in big trouble. That's how they got to nearly 600 yards of total offense. I mean, wow. They're a really really good team. But it was a game with some great moments.
Mm-hmm.
Terry Moore returning that ridiculous fake field goal. Well, Donald, what was that play even? Like the field goal kicker, he didn't even look like it wasn't. There was no one there for him to kick the ball. Like I don't understand what Lane Kiffin was doing with that play, but it just
there's a lot of those plays that they start like that, and then when they realize that the defense knows we're doing a fake play, they shift into a normal mode and then kick. They just decided we're going to snap the ball anyway, and Duke was like, let's take advantage of that. And the thing about that, Jason, is that was like the first possession of the game, right? So when this happens,
bizarre. Yeah,
when this happens, you're like, okay, first of all, Lane Kiffin just does not think anything of Duke. Duke takes this ball, he takes it back to like the 40, 45-yard line. And I was like, man, if we could get just 3 points out of this, that will tell Lane Kiffin to never do this again. And that was what happened. We couldn't move the ball. We had to punt back, and then they score in the next possession, and they're off and running.
Yeah, and some strange play calling there, because Duke had a 3rd and 1 and a 4th and 1, and they passed on both those plays with their very young, inexperienced quarterback, as opposed to trying to run the ball. I thought it was a weird play calling, but on the other hand, I mean, Duke was we were unable to run the ball the whole game. We averaged like 1.1 yards per rush or something like that. So it wasn't like, Duke was going to have a bunch of great running plays. The other really great moment was when Samir Higgins returned the kickoff 99 yards after crossing the lateral.
Was that the Duval miracle? Was that what we're going to call it? Because it's similar to Music City Miracle, except that one won a game. This one didn't, but it was still fun.
Yeah. So there were some. I mean, look, if you went to watch the Blue Devils play, you got to see some fun plays, and that's kind of cool. I really felt the key moment to me in the game. The score was 14-0, and they were down. Ole Miss was down on their own 30. We had just sacked Jackson Dart. We'd had a tackle for loss. They were in a 3rd and 19, and Jackson Dart ripped off a 19-yard scramble to get a first down. And that was the moment I was like, I think we don't have a chance in this game.
He's built at another level. But I will say on defense, despite the fact that we gave up a lot of yards, and again, it was a lot of big plays that they had. We talked about trying to limit those, and that didn't happen. But Ozzie Nicholas had 11 tackles. Alex Howard was all over the place. He had 9 tackles, half a sack, 1.5 tackles for loss, and a pass defense. We had a lot of pressures on Jackson Dart, but we were just this close, right? Like if we're a half step quicker, Jackson Dart's on the ground instead of the ball going 20 yards downfield to an open wide receiver. So it's those little things that, of course, you can take and be disappointed with, but also things you can kind of say, hey, there's some room for improvement here. You see some signs of how this thing can come together. And Jason, as we kind of close out on the Gator Bowl thing, I think what's great about this is that some of these names we just mentioned are coming back to Duke, and namely one big addition, or at least one retention, in the name of Chandler Rivers, the first team All ACC cornerback, 3rd team All American. I thought it was great. Like the day after the Gator Bowl, he posts a graphic that says, quote, "I don't like how that ended," and the sign on the graphic just said simply, "Run it back." So the fact that we are getting Chandler Rivers back on this team, on this defense, and again, as we mentioned, we were so scared of the transfer portal. A lot of people were worried that the transfer portal was going to claim a lot of guys from Duke's defense. It didn't. A lot of these guys are sticking around, and that continuity is something that we can look at as promise for next season, as we say 9-3, ending 9-4. Maybe that's the sign that this team says 9-4 is just not good enough, and we want to strive for more.
Yeah, definitely getting a guy like Chandler Rivers back. Yeah, there aren't even stats on him that really convey what he does. We talked a little bit during the season, Rivers Island. You know, that you stick him on the opposing team's best wide receiver, and you don't need to worry about that guy too much. That is a super valuable thing. Look, I'm fairly Duke is losing both Jordan Moore and Eli Pankel, who've run out of eligibility, but Samir Hagans is back. Keyshawn Brown is back. The rushing attack gets back Jaquez Moore, who, by the way, played in this game, really showed some rust. 9 rushes for 10 carries, but Jaquez Moore will be better next year. We, of course, bring in a stud quarterback. I think it's still an open question, I think, whether Henry Beelan decides to come back to Duke to be the backup, because there is a spring transfer portal. He has not entered the portal yet. He could decide to, and he played pretty well in this game. But on the other hand, I think he's a year from graduating. He's been at Duke for 3 years. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. If I was him, not a guy with a ton of pro prospects, I might say, I'm going to get my Duke degree and then maybe transfer someplace else and see what things are like. But Duke's done really well in the portal. We picked up a couple wide receivers that I'm really interested in. A kid from Harvard who was like the leading wide receiver in all of FCS, which is the smaller division of Division I, had more than 1,000 yards receiving, 11 touchdowns, first team All Ivy. We picked up him. We also got a kid from Oklahoma who he was on his way to like a monster season in 2023 for Oklahoma, and got injured like halfway through the year, and the injury affected him so much that he wasn't really able to play this year. Now, look, you never know with a guy. Is he injured and it's going to forever affect his career, or is he all the way back? If he's all the way back, he's going to be a contender for like all ACC. I mean, this kid was incredible at Oklahoma for that half year before he got hurt. So Duke's really doing some things in the portal. And I just want to close really quick by reminding everyone what a stunning achievement this season was. No one expected Duke to be even in the ballpark of this good. I'm in an email group. I've mentioned this before, with a bunch of Duke fans. There were like 40 of us who gave our projections for how many wins Duke would have this season. Not a single person picked 9 wins. 0, none. None of these rabid Duke fans said 9 wins can happen for this Duke team. Most of the people were picking 4 or 5. And I know a little bit of it this year was Duke getting lucky. Let's be clear. We were 6-1 in games decided by 7 points or less. But Manny Diaz has installed a winning culture. And unless something awful happens in the spring portal, we're going to get a whole bunch of this elite defense back. And we already know that we've added some important pieces on offense. And the recruiting class is as good as it's been at Duke in a decade, with most folks saying that what Duke has signed is like a top 30 kind of class. At Duke, Donald, this Duke team is going to get votes in the top 25 preseason poll. I don't know that they're going to be ranked, but they're going to get votes. And it won't be from Steve Spurrier just throwing a courtesy vote at his beloved school that he coached at many years ago. Duke is legitimately a team that is a top 25 caliber team next year. I'm telling you, Duke's going to be like 4th, 5th or so in the ACC preseason voting. That's my bet. People know that this Duke team and what Manny Diaz has done is something impressive, and 9-4 is just the beginning.
Look, next year, some of the teams that we face: Elon, Illinois. We are at Tulane, where we could have Darian Mensah and perhaps maybe a Mekhi Hughes going back to Tulane, if we can land him as well in the portal. At UConn, at Cal, at Clemson, and then we have home games against Georgia Tech, NC State, Virginia, Wake Forest. We're at UNC, and we're at Syracuse. That is that's a schedule. When you look at it, you go, hey, these are some games that Duke can win these games. It's not a murderer's row of schedule like we kind of looked at this year, and in some ways didn't turn out to be the case. But I'm looking at this and saying, hey, Duke has a chance here to do something special if we can get some of these guys. Jeremiah Hasley, who was out for most of the season due to injury, if he can come back and be healthy, that's another 500, 600 yards receiving that we can get from our tight end position. And so, because he was slated to be one of those ones. So the future's bright for Duke football. We're really excited for that. We're sad at how the season has ended, but we look back at the season that we had, and as you mentioned, a season that we were picked 11th in the ACC. We finished way better than that, and we were really just a missed extra point, a blocked extra point away from being right there on the edge of being in the ACC championship game with aspirations of something more. That's what we're hopefully looking for next year. So we will close it out here on this episode of DBR Bites. See, it wasn't that long of bites, but it ended up being because we really like our teams. Again, stay in touch with us, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. We'll be back to you after the Pitt game, some point maybe Wednesday, so check for your feeds then. But until then, he's Jason, I'm Donald, and that sound you'd hear, it's the Duke Band. They're playing us out and taking us home.